All right, everyone, it's time for your daily dose of real news since you're not going to get it on like CNN or Fox or anything. Got to talk about the California ballot proposal, which is they're going to actually have a vote come November on whether to split the state in three. There would be a Northern California, which would be overwhelmingly blue. It's like centered around San Francisco. A Southern California, which would be marginally a red state, or at least lean red. And then there'd be California, which doesn't make a lot of sense, and I don't know why they didn't just do a two-state thing. Why don't they just have Northern and Southern California? Northern California, capital of San Francisco. Southern California, capital of LA. That would be a little bit more sensible than splitting in three, but I don't know. I don't know why they're doing that. Anyway, here's my general thoughts about it. The ballot measure will probably fail. There's like a 99.9% chance that it doesn't even cross over a third of the voters supporting it. But if it were done, it would benefit both the Democrats and the Republicans. The Democrats would probably improve their standing in the Senate, while the Republicans, actually manage to get some state-level recognition in an area that they generally, at the state level, they certainly don't have any real control in. The governor, the House, the Senate of California tend to be solidly blue internally because it's a state that's overrun by liberal individuals. So you've got a minority of the population that essentially is not recognized in federal elections anyway, because when you vote for the president, it's basically a foregone conclusion where they're going to vote. By splitting the state on a federal level, therefore, at least for the purposes of the presidency, it allows those other voters to have a say, while at the same time the Democrats gain additional Senate power. Sort of an even-Steven sort of situation. Tilts a little bit in favor of the Republicans for the presidency, but for other intents, other than at the state level, it maybe tilts it towards the Democrats. At least that would be my expectation. Now, the thing is, I'm sure that there will be just as many progressives supporting this as people on the right. What you may see is a situation where the establishmentarians, torpedo the concept overwhelmingly, but you end up with a lot of younger progressive Democrats voting for it, along with a bunch of younger sort of new right Republicans. They're all like, yeah, change is good. California doesn't work the way it is currently. We could tackle our problems better. The left would have free-for-all in Northern California. The right would have a free-for-all in Southern California. We could get something accomplished finally and not be a laughingstock. I will submit one other concept, though. And this isn't just for California, but for any significantly large state in which you have some areas are overwhelmingly urban, like San Francisco and LA. Other areas are extremely rural. Some people, they think of California, what do they think of? They think of San Francisco and LA and San Diego and nothing else. Maybe a couple of other, maybe Napa Valley or something. The economic situation, when you have one governing body making all the determinations in such an area, unless it is more or less homogenous, Wyoming or something. The vast majority of Wyoming is highly rural. And then, like a tenth of the entire state's population lives in one city, which is its capital, or even more, I think, than 10% at this point. Vermont is overwhelmingly rural. You do have like the Champlain Valley is developed. Burlington is technically a city, but it's still technically small town America. It's not New York City. You have the same problem in New York. Most of upstate New York is actually quite rural. But when people think of New York, they only think of New York City or maybe Albany or Rochester or something. A few urban areas. And New York City and Albany collectively control the state completely, despite the fact that a minority, like 40% of the state, lives in areas that are actually totally red, like more red than Wyoming or Texas. So if you can believe this, people in parts of upstate near the Adirondack region, they're not exactly hippies. They're not exactly Manhattan socialites. They're not Donald Trump. They actually are far right. You have this problem in states that are overly large and have that significant demographic difference from region to region. California is probably the greatest example of this in the entire U.S. You have a large state. You have a few very, very populated urban areas, and then the rest of the state is actually small town and rural America. In some cases, outright wilderness. Those areas are not properly represented. Therein lies the problem. That's why there are constantly people talking about wanting New York City to become its own, basically a city-state, with the rest of New York, with Albany as its seat, being separate from it. There is some, you could theoretically do this at least at the sub-federal level. You don't need to necessarily split the state entirely, but for certain representative purposes, you could I believe Virginia has a situation where they have like almost what amounts to city-states in these little urban areas in some cases. You look at a map of the voting districts, certainly it implies that. I'm not 100% sure, but I do believe that it is some sort of hybrid system along those lines. Splitting California probably won't happen. Although I will say it's more likely than secession, like the two states that talk about seceding, like Texas and Vermont typically. That's never going to happen. But as far as California potentially splitting at some point in the future, there have been initiatives. One made it far enough to actually make it to their legislature back, I think, in the 90s. And it was, of course, shot down. It died in the Rules Committee, but it did manage to make it there. It is theoretically possible, but then Congress would have to vote on it and say, okay, yes, you can split your state. If you're going to do that, it would make sense to say, okay, but only once like Puerto Rico and Guam apply for and are accepted for statehood, and maybe another state wants to split, like maybe New York City will split from New York State or something. There'd have to be some sort of massive grand bargain that creates a political zero-sum game with a generally peaceful feel in the country, that where the stress in the country that's splitting, the state that's splitting, is separate from a generally peaceful nation that will see it as a joke and therefore not be bothered by the concept. You'd need a weird situation like that. That's what I would hazard to guess. I would guess that no more than 20% of the Californians will vote, maybe 25% in favor of splitting the state, although it's an acceptable idea. It wouldn't actually cause chaos. It's not going to cause anarchy in the streets if it does happen. It's just, at this point, I don't think there's enough stress. It would be more likely that you would have a semi-successful attempt by the far blue Californians to secede from the United States because of their Trump derangement syndrome. I think that would be actually, honestly, a little bit more likely. And that would cause some chaotic shit to happen in the state, because some people would assume that it would actually work. That's about all. Peace out.